Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANCSA, was passed in 1971 and was known as the largest land settlement act in U.S. history. It transferred 44 million acres of land to the Alaska Native Regional and Village Corporations and passed on $962.5 million in compensation for the lost land due to the settlement agreement. It also extinguished Aboriginal land claims, which were not addressed by the federal government prior to this act, and divided it into 13, now 12, regional corporations and over 200 private village operations.
The initial purpose of ANCSA was to help Alaska Natives achieve official ownership of their land by dividing the state into 12 districts and creating Native corporations to oversee each one. The act had a profoundly beneficial effect on the economy of Alaska, but did a questionable job of completing its supposed main goal, with many loopholes and loose ends in the process. ANCSA, therefore, is a big example of how a right was given, but the responsibility in sticking by it was inadequately addressed. The Alaska Statehood Act was passed in 1959 after a series of other acts claimed Alaska to be under the United States' care and even have a delegate for Congress and the U.S. Marshal. A total of over 370 million acres of Alaskan land was sold to the United States, defining Alaska's borders. And the Statehood Act defined election representation in voting, but never addressed land claims. Rather, it completely took land from the natives and had it under the U.S.
In 1966, over 400 natives gathered together to discuss the Aboriginal land claims and created the Alaska Federation of Natives, or AFN. Before this was formed, two Native Alaskan tribes called the Tlingit and Haida were unhappy with the selling of Alaska to the U.S., so they sued, won the case in 1959, and managed to get monetary compensation in 1968. By this time, natives started to realize how big of a problem land claims were and began to band together, protesting over the selling of their homeland under the Statehood Act. Eventually, even as a small organization and community, they ended up holding a big voice for the passing of ANCSA later on.
There were many people who contributed to the formation of ANCSA, but two of them stood out from the pack. One was Willie Agiogruk Hensley. He was born in 1941 in Kotzebue and was raised in a traditionally Inupiaq lifestyle. He went on to create a long career in government and business, including writing an essay on Alaskan Native land claims and securing his spot as an important leader for ANCSA years later. Since retiring from politics, he's written an autobiography about his childhood in northern Alaska, as well as his part in politics for Alaska.
The Settlement Act is still controversial, but I don't think many people realize that we're probably this close to getting nothing. Had it not been for the dedication and the unity of people who fought really at the 11th hour to try to preserve something of what our people used to own.
Another important figure was Wally Hickel, shown here on the right. Born in 1919 in Kansas, Hickel moved to Alaska in 1940 and served as a civilian flight maintenance inspector for the Army Air Corps. In 1969, he was later promoted to Secretary of the Department of the Interior by President Nixon and helped bring ANCSA out in a rolling fashion. He was by Nixon's side as he signed the paper. After a dispute with Nixon about hostility towards student anti-war demonstrators, he was forced to resign later in 1970. In 1990, he was elected governor of Alaska and later died in 2010.
ANCSA had many objectives, such as settle Aboriginal land claims for Alaska Natives, give Alaska Natives official ownership of land, and create the 12 regions that gave them this land. It also strengthened Alaska economy and mandated that land and resources of the 44 million acres are managed by for-profit Alaska Native corporations. It also gave Alaska Native shares of their regions corporations instead of membership into the corporation.
This affects the oil industry of Alaska. Due to the wording and bylaws of ANCSA, oil companies can dig out oil in all of the Native Village Corporation lands, since the corporations themselves can only lay claim to the surface. In the 1960s, oil in Alaska became a massive market, with millions of dollars getting pumped into the state to extract more and more oil. Native Alaskan Aboriginal land claims responded by hindering oil production, fighting against the use and destruction of their land. In 1971, ANCSA was brought into law, removing all Alaska Natives' Aboriginal land claims, making room for projects like the Trans-Alaska Pipeline to go through.
problems with the oil industry, contamination was just another one. In 1990, 1995, and 2014, it was shown that the land given to the native Alaskans by ANCSA were contaminated with arsenic, lead, asbestos, mercury, pesticides, polychlorinated biphenyls, which are super toxic chemicals, and petroleum products. This brought a significant concern to the natives' health, safety, cultural practices, and economic opportunities. In 1990, Congress told the Department of Interior to write a report on the contaminated lands. In 1995, Congress asked for another on the effects of this contamination, which led to the 1998 report on these problems. However, these were barely acknowledged and did not handle the problem until in 2014, Congress requested a more fleshed out report, resulting in inventory of the contaminated land and their cleanup status. An unintended consequence of ANCSA was that lands selected by corporations were conveyed regardless of whether they were contaminated, because the law prioritizes speed of title transfer and completion of boundary surveys, and does not have a requirement for physical inspection of lands. Alaska is the fourth most polluted state and produced 535 million pounds of toxic waste in 2000 on its own.
ANCSA's approval clearly had effects on Alaska Native peoples, helping them claim more of Alaska's land through corporations. A lesser-known impact the Act had was on Alaska's economy. The Act mandated that Alaska Native corporations be for-profit, creating diversity among the money of the state. This increases the value of the Alaskan dollar and benefits all Alaskan residents, not just Alaska Native. Another way Native corporations impacted the economy was through shares and dividends. While initially, shareholder eligibility was relatively limited by strict requirements, the Act was amended in 1991, allowing more people to claim shares. In addition to this larger shareholder base, the value of shares has also increased since the Act's inception, from less than $200 per share up to $3,700. ANCSA had a profound impact on Alaska's economy, even more so than on Native Alaskan land ownership, the apparent focus of the Act.
ANCSA also had very negative impacts on Native Alaskans. They felt like they were forced into ANCSA because of what had happened to the extinguished recognition of tribes in the lower 48. So therefore, they thought it was created to extinguish their culture and assimilate them into a capitalist culture instead. ANCSA had also promised all Native Alaskans 100 shares in the local corporation if they're at least 1/4 Native Alaskan and born before 1971. But due to the lack of genealogy papers in many small villages and the general complexity of the process, many were unable to gain their shares. Lastly, it forced many Native Alaskans to choose between the corporate world of America and actually keeping their culture, and many were forced to prioritize the former, such as profit over community.
While ANCSA was put forth with seemingly good intentions, not everything was as it seemed. The Act was later reevaluated and considered for its many loopholes and its specific phrasing, which could have led to coercive compliance.
Today, almost 54 years later, Native Alaskans are advocating for a better act that gives them the opportunity to embrace their culture and community and to preserve the past without having to fit the mold of a capitalist company.